Hey, quick hello. What we've got here is a very nice instrument. Look at this. This is Bob's Epiphone Les Paul standard gold top looking thing. I think it's called a gold top. It doesn't have to have P90s to be a gold top, does it? I don't know. Anyway, beautiful looking thing. Very, very good condition. I would say brand new, unplayed, virtually unplayed. Bob sent this down for a setup, and he's got it at an action. I think that he's aimed at an action that he wants, and it's clearly run into some choking on the notes. I've got this back to front of my free rotor sound strap. Keep getting these free straps, which are kind of good because every time I need to put a guitar on the strap in the workshop, I've got one of these to revert to. But anyway, this is the Goldie Toffee thing, and it's a lovely feeling guitar straight off. But I won't put this sound on just yet, but I will play you a couple of notes so you can hear where it goes wrong. Well, first of all, what I noticed when I got it was, apart from the fact how nice, it's all in good nick and everything. First thing I noticed was that the action's set quite low down here, which is fine, but we've got absolutely no or very little bending, choking out very early on, or choking out on the bends. Also at that action down here we've got some fizzy notes, some virtually choking out. So there's definitely a cluster of high frets that need taken care of. What I noticed about the first fret action is it looks almost perfect. The nut has been modified. It's a custom nut, excuse me, that Bob's put on, and it's done to get the maximum spacing out of this nut for, I think he's done it to make it easier to learn on. So the spacing is a little unusual in that it's quite close to the edge on the low E, which he's happy with and wants to keep it that way, which is fine. As it happens, this is beautifully adjusted, so I don't need to make any adjustment at all. So everything else about it plays nice, except for a few of those notes up here on the low strings. Obviously I'm going to check the action on that, see if it's not ridiculously low, because if it's ridiculously low, then in a way we can't necessarily expect to get it to play at such a low action. So but I don't think it is. I think it's about as low as it can go the way it's currently set, but we can attempt to make it play with a very, very precise light fret leveling, for which I'd use the 400 grit and a thin truss rod. I've had a play in the house and trying to just get a feel of it, and I really like the way it feels, and I love the way it sounds. Bridge pickup is a little far from the strings for my liking, so you're too quiet and a drop of volume when you go from the neck down to the bridge. So I would personally bring that up. Everything else works. The neck is currently very straight, so the first thing I'll do is possibly make a very small adjustment to that, and then we'll let it settle, and then we'll see how these notes come out. Now if that slight adjustment to the neck frees up these particular notes here, then I'll play it a bit more, and we may not require fret leveling. What I do note is that the ends of the frets here are a little bit sharp. If I did fret leveling, then the polishing process would take care of that. If I didn't, then I'd have to, well, I kind of want to just do a little bit of gentle filing on the ends there. We shall see. A load of slack in these strings. I don't know how long Bob had them on and playing them, but if there were any issues with stability of tuning, it would be coming from the unreleased slack. And it's still there. You can see I'm pull it a bit more, even though I've done this loads already this morning. Was in tune, and now what you'll see is out of tune again. It's got nothing to do with the tuners, it's got nothing to do with anything moving down here. It's purely either the strings catching in the slot up here, which I don't think it is on this. I haven't heard any pinging or catching, and the only other thing it is unreleased slack in the strings. So, you know, Bob, I'm forgive me if I'm doing a granny sucking eggs thing here, but if you're new to playing and restringing your guitar, getting all of the slack out of the strings is such an important part of enjoying the guitar, and it takes a lot longer than most people think, to the point where this may well have tuned up fine and you may well have actually been able to strum it for ages with it staying in tune, but as soon as I put a pull on it or even a hard bend on it, that unreleased slack is coming out. Okay, so I say this time and time again, but you know, and I apologise if it's something you already know, and I don't want to patronise you, but not as many people as you'd think know how thoroughly you need to do it. Now I'll do it really thoroughly when I replace these strings at the end of the setup on this. I'm not going to play it right now, there's no need, everything works. I just wanted to kind of give you that overview of it before I start. So really the issue for me is just going to be measuring. I'm going to start by just measuring the action here. Also what I want to do while I'm at it, I've got a cup of coffee to drink, which I'll need to stop and drink, but I'm just going to take off the cover first and just make a small truss rod adjustment and let it sort of settle in as far as I can, and so that I end up with a little bit of curvature in it compared to what it is now, which is dead flat. You can, obviously, you can play a guitar that's dead flat. However, the dead flatness has two kind of implications. One is that it sort of invites what I call string slap, which is where there's not enough room for this bigger movement in the middle, and you find the strings slapping on the frets. And in a way, I kind of call that different from fret buzz. I mean, it's all only terminology, but I call it slap. And the reason why it's different is that it can happen if your action's too low. It can happen even when you've got no unevenness in the frets. Okay, so I'm going to just slack this truss rod off a tiny bit, if it will allow me to do it. Perhaps a quarter of a truss turn, and just kind of hold it there for a bit. So I'm going to go off camera, drink my coffee, and let this settle, and we'll come back and just tiny little. Has it adjusted a little bit already? Yeah, it has already. I mean, still choking out. Okay, well, I won't go off camera yet. Let me just do this checking that I was planning to do. My granddad specs. So, okay, this is dead on 1. It's just a fraction under, a little bit over. And this is obviously my favourite tunematic bridge structure. The most horrible invention known to man. So there's not a lot of adjustment. You get what the bridge is set to. So down here we've got more than I would want. We've got, realistically, about 2 point something. So I'm going to take this down a fraction. Now the pickup is getting in the way. Again, if I'm going to go to what I think these guitars can tolerate, get it the right way, I'm going to wind it in to 1.5 millimeters on the last fret. That's about there, which obviously makes this a little bit lower now. That's dead on the 1, so I'm just going to raise this a tiny fraction, only a tiny bit. I don't want this so low that we're going to just take away all the frets in a desperate attempt. What we've got is I keep finding this. The tunematic bridge almost never accurately maps the profile. So what we've got here is on the high E, we've got exactly a millimeter. Here we're under a millimeter, 0.75, and then we're back to a millimeter. So this radius here is basically putting it's keeping the B string slightly low, which is going to put certain demands on this. Now, with that tiniest of adjustments, now we've still got choking. I thought we might have just cleared it. So that's the sort of the ideal action I would like, but I'm going to leave that there to settle and then make the adjustment, or check the adjustment on the truss rod. But providing that doesn't move anymore, then that is the sort of target action that we're going to aim for, and it'll be a very, very delicate, precise fret leveling, as the name suggests. And what we'll probably see is that there's a little choking. Again, Bob, for your information, or for you, I mean, I've said this on different videos, but one of the reasons that Les Paul shape is an interesting thing is if you think about this, the neck thickens up from 13th fret onwards, plus the fact it's then glued to a solid wall of mahogany in all the way along this length and part of the way along this length, and also underneath. So this, basically what it tells you is this whole section of the neck has virtually no flexibility at all. And what that means is no matter what you do to the truss rod, it means that this part is straight, tends to be straight, or it's whatever the frets are doing. I mean, they may be uneven, but generally speaking this part of the neck is straight. Then if you put a little bit of curvature into the neck, which ideally you want to do to allow the strings to move, what you've got is a sort of knuckle here. You've got a straight bit followed by a curve, and obviously that makes a sort of congestion here. If you get rid of it and flatten the neck out completely so that the rest of the neck is as flat as this, then you kind of get rid of a lot of that, and you may still have uneven frets here by virtue of where they're sitting, how they've been pressed in, and microscopic changes, you'll always get that. But what you'll have done is kind of diminish the effect of this knuckle bit that I call it here, or the bit with the handle of the scythe, or the sickle, whatever, scythe. The handle joins the curve. If you flatten that out, it's no longer there because that's all flat. So you minimise it by doing that. But the problem is, then you force yourself to have to raise the action of it because you've got no room for the string to move. So the truth is, if you want to have a little bit of curvature to allow the string to move, then it kind of creates a problem again. It reintroduces this knuckly bit here on top of any uneven frets that are also in there, and that's why you get a lot of problems in this area on Les Paul guitars. Some guitar people do what they call a fall off or something, and they kind of just sand everything from here backwards in a backward gradient. Now, interestingly, my curved truss rod tool doesn't require me to do that. There's something about it which is just delicate enough to take this sticking up knuckle bit and incorporate it. It curves it, it hollows it out, or scoops it out a little bit. So where this stands a little bit like a Nobly bit in the overall smooth curve, this keeping a curved tool reintroduces the curve back into here. Now obviously it does that by removing some material from these frets, but it's the only way you're going to do it, and actually it's better than doing it to all of the frets, to ensure that, you know, that fall away is a bit crude, because all it says is let's make sure that one is higher than that one, which is higher than that one, which is higher than that one, to make sure we don't get any problems. But that's a bit of a hammer to crack a nut sort of approach. Anyway, you'll see that that's one of the beauties, or the elegant things about this method of fret leveling that I use, of doing it with the guitar curved, the neck curved as it can be. Now, having said all that, none of this stuff is rocket science precise, because there are all kinds of intrinsic problems, one of which is, even on a flexible neck like an SG, where all of the neck, including all of the truss rod, is outside of the guitar's constraints, so it's free of the body and will curve as one piece, even there, the center point of your neck curvature is off center from the center point of your string movement, which is usually about here. So even there, it's not entirely accurate. It's just a design flaw, which I cured, fixed with a strange prototype hanging up over there. It's a deadly secret. You can't see it. It's a big white sunlit doorway, but next to it is a secret prototype guitar that I made, which doesn't have that problem. Anyway, just for fun. Anyway, so back to this. Yeah, so that little mismatch between those two things is an inherent problem, just as the structure and the function of this tunematic bridge is inherently problematic, including the mismatch between the actual fret radius of the seated frets and the actual radius of this mass-produced bridge saddles. They don't match on this one. They're supposed to, but they don't. Anyway, like I said, I'm going to switch off a minute, leave this settle as much as it's going to, and then we'll get back to the process of setting up. Okay, where are we? Oh yes, we're checking the relief. There's a little tiny bit more relief in there now. Not much. It's quite stiff. Even undoing it, I tend to find that it's not so stiff when you're going the other way. But anyway, that's good for now. Action is fine. Neck relief is now fine, and the nut first fret action is perfect too. So really, I've got nothing else to do right this second, but to launch into it with the fret leveling, and to do this, I might, in fact I will, create, oh, there goes the nut. Okay, didn't expect that to happen. That's okay, it's where it is. It's perfectly fitted, so I won't do anything to it. I'll put it back on as is, but I would probably glue it myself just to keep it in one place. Okay, so what was I going to say? Oh yeah, I'm going to just tweak the truss rod and put some new sandpaper on. And the reason I'm going to do that, and the reason I'm also going to use a 400 grit one, is that these are quite low frets to begin with. They're not. It's not like they're old. But they're actually a fairly low, relatively low profile fret. So I haven't got masses of material to work with. So I'm going to, anyway, I want to be very, very careful in terms of fret metal loss. But as I said, I know that because of the flaws in the Les Paul design, we know we're going to lose some metal up here if we want both a low action and no buzz. Or I should have said a low action and as flat a neck profile as possible. Okay, so this is going to just kind of go back into place. It is beautifully lined up, and there is a bit of slide that we can do from side to side if necessary. Just put them sort of roughly on the same sort of pressure. Take a note from here. Now the purpose of having this in tune for the fret leveling is mainly for the advantage of having the neck loaded with as close to normal playing load as possible. The tuning part isn't in and of itself important. Right, I'm just going to put this up for a second, out of the way. What I'm going to do is I'm going to get my trusty truss rod down. This is I can't remember how long this one is. Anyway, it's one that I use. It's the thinnest one, and it's quite dependable in the way it works. But it's got 400 grit paper on there, which is this stuff. So I'm going to put some more on there. I'll take the original off and put some fresh paper on, because I want this to be as good as possible, obviously. My ebook shows how to do this, which is very simple, but how to do it and how to use it. That's probably the harder bit, but you can see from anybody who watches any of my videos will work it out. But I put it together in one place in the ebook, save people who don't want to watch hours of video. It's a little bit fighting me a little bit, but anyway, the idea is to get the old stuff off. It will leave some sticky goo behind, it's always the way, but then we can give that a bit of a clean off in a second. Well, we could, if I had any tissue paper left, which I don't, so I'm going to use a bit of cloth. Kitchen roll, that's what I'm going to get from the supermarket. Anyway, so I'm just de-gummifying this for a second. I'm also going to need to be ordering some more of that Coleman's cooking fluid. It's a good solvent. It runs out pretty quickly though. Okay, so there's my pretty much cleaned off thing. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to get me a ruler. Now I can either do it one of two ways. How many of these can I get out of here? I can get about 4 out of there. So let me just go cut to the outside. It's better to waste a little bit rather than have too little. If I try and cut it directly the size of the thing, it tends to be too little. Tend to undercut it a little bit, so I'm going to overcut it and then trim. Right, so that's terrible. Wiggly line doesn't really matter that much, but it's not that impressive. So we can go back in the box. Where's the rough edge? There it is. So okay, now I'm just going to lift this off. Come along. Brilliant. Got this caught in the way. Okay, so plonk that down there and then just drop this down, stick it on. Obviously this is longer than the truss rod, so I'm going to cut it there, and then I'm going to trim it down the sides. Like so. And then down to the other side. So this is a freshly milled bit of sandpaper, so it'll do the best cutting. So there's a little bit of wastage, but not too much. Right, so there we have it, ready to go. So, get that out of the way as well. Here we have the beast. Right, so the principle of this is going to be, with this kind of fret leveling, there's a couple of reasons for doing it like this. One is that it's a little bit more accurate than the conventional method, and that's because the conventional method, when you slacken or flatten the neck and use a beam or some other device to level the frets, and then use a rocker to check that they're all level relative to each other, that's effective, and I would say it's 95% more effective than not doing anything. The reason why this works a little bit better is because when you do it the passive method, once you've leveled it, you then introduce, when you put it under load, you introduce not only curvature into the neck, which is okay, the relative evenness is preserved, relative levelness, even in that curve, but what's reintroduced that wasn't there before is a compression of the neck, which is this way movement, not just curvature, and that compression slightly moves how the frets sit, so you actually get a better, more accurate level if you level with the compression effects already at play. Now here's how you do it. You get your truss rod and you deform your truss rod into a copy, or mimicking, to mimic the curvature in the neck of the guitar. And you can see I'm doing this in the, what I call the top track, or the E track, close to where the E string sits. Obviously I can't do it to the outside of it, but I'm doing it to the underside of it. And what you do is, using these three little feet, you bend your truss rod until it matches the curve in the neck. Now that's too far because it's hitting the middle first and not the end. So my anchor point is always the left hand side, but I'm aiming to get all three touching simultaneously, and it takes a bit of fiddling around. It's not, this particular truss rod is probably the most accurate of all, and it's also thinnest, so it works really well. But it takes a little while to get there. Let's turn that off. It takes a little while to get there, but it's also, because of its thinness, it's also fairly flexible. That's about right. And because it's flexible, you can danger of flattening it and deforming it while you're using it, so you have to be very careful. So once I've mimicked the curve, I lift the string out, get my little rubber string spreader, push it out of the way, and here's the fun bit. I get the truss rod in its curve exactly as we've just matched it up, and gently run it up and down the frets, cutting the metal very, very gently. Now what will happen is you'll get a pretty quick indication of what's going on. Now this is 400 grit, so we can do that without too much risk. And what you'll see, I don't know how well you can see it, but what we've got is, looking down at it, I can see cutting, cutting, not cutting, that's a low fret, cutting, not cutting, cutting, not cutting, 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 a little bit, a lot, a little bit, more, a little bit, quite a bit, not much, a little bit. So you can pretty much see a number of things straight away. First of all, because it's cutting at various points all the way along, I can be confident that I've matched the curve correctly. Then after that, what it's telling me is the ones it's taking most off are actually the high ones in the sequence. But the nice thing about this method is I can do a little bit, and you can't do this any other way if you think about it. I can do a little bit and then I can stop, and I can try out each of the notes. Now they're already playing better than they were before. I'm going to do a tiny whisker more on this track. The challenge is the next track and bending this top E into the B track. What happens is when you have a very low action, and basically the clearance on bends as you bend across the radius, across the radius, and the clearance disappears because you're pushing the string uphill effectively. So the clearance disappears between that and the next frets, especially if there are uneven frets. So we may well have cleared this individual notes nicely, but I would still expect it to choke as we bend it. Okay, so it's still choking. That's only going to be taken care of as we move into the next series of slots. So I'm going to leave that one there for a minute, and I'm going to recalibrate. Even in the same track, I haven't moved position yet, I'm recalibrating in the same, basically the same place as before, but this accepts the fact that the bar moves in shape, changes shape. Okay, so I would say that needs to just slack a tiny bit, but the amounts are so tiny. That's how precise it is. It's good, feels like it's on all of them. Now I'm going to do the B track. Lift the string out, move it across, spread it down the bottom, and this is a critical one because if we get this one right, we should free up the bends for the E string coming across into the B string's track. And this is where I'm kind of expecting to see a cluster of high frets down in that area. Again, it's a very small adjustment each time, and I'm kind of going to do a bit, stop, and then examine and see what it's telling me. Okay, let's have a feel. There's some right at the top there that are cutting quite a lot. Got one there. Now we're choking out still a little bit there on that bend. Now what we have to be wary of is it just may be that we get to a point where an action is so low you can't get that bend across and up the hill. I hate to ever have to accept that thing. I like to keep going until it's freed up, but it is possible that you just can't do it. The tighter the radius on the guitar, the harder it is to have bends at very, very low actions, but I don't want to admit that sort of level of defeat. Okay, if I can get away with it. On the plus side, even if you can't quite reach it on the given action, the tiniest upward movement will often clear it. So what it's telling me is it's choking out on the B, choking out on the fret here in the B track. You can hear what it's trying to play, which is that one. It tells us it's choking out on that location, which when I'm looking at this now, it's not getting a massive amount of attention. Then the alternative, like I said, is you can go down here and you can just make a tiny adjustment on there and it may be enough to clear it. Not in this case. Let's see how much it would take to clear it. Quite a lot. Am I across into the G track? I am pretty much. Let's not give it up yet. Let's see where we go with this a minute. Let's go back in. See there, we're at 1.5, which is a bit over 1. Okay, let's hold our judgment. Reserve judgment until we've done the G track, and then have a re-examine. Again, recalibrate each time. Not curved enough. It really are the tiniest of measurements we're talking here. And because the bar deforms ever so slightly, you've got to be conscious of how you're holding it and how you're letting the gravity land on the tops of it. That will do. Okay, now we're onto the G track. One of the things that this is good for as well, it's not the case on this guitar, but if you have some play wear from many years of playing the guitar, this is a good way of tidying that up too. It's often a byproduct. It's rare that I would go and embark on leveling frets just to remove play wear. It's a sort of secondary concern really, mainly because it has to be really bad for it to affect the playability of the guitar. Some gentle grooving doesn't really get in the way at all. And we're getting into the G track, choking in the B track still. And it's this one here, 15th fret. It's funny how that works. Why is that different? Something to do with the way it presses down. Okay, I'm going to go across the rest of these, and then I'm going to, excuse me, come back and pay attention to that top track, because we want to get these notes freed up if at all possible. It's quite difficult. Let's get one further, right. Again, that's dead on. Now these seem to be playing okay. The action's a little bit higher, obviously, as we're coming this way, so it's slightly less critical. But I'm obviously going to continue leveling so that there's a continuity in the way it's cutting on the surface of the frets. We don't want it just to stop. If we've cut the fret tops, we don't want a sort of abrupt end. But we can phase it out, or we can sort of tailor it off at this point. If all the strings, all the notes play nicely. Yeah, pretty much alright from there on, but I'm just going to lightly do these so that we've got that consistency. So it'll be on the top 2, 3 that we've got to concentrate a little bit more work. Again, recalibrating at every step to make sure we've got the right profile. Oh, this is where a piece of string can come in handy. Move the strings out of the way. And very little needed here, so I'm just going to keep it light just to take off any obvious unevenness. Again, I'm just looking now, so we were saying 15, 12, 13, 14, 15, there's a troublesome one down there. Yeah, we've got to work a bit harder. And then calibrate again for the bottom E, which is quite a long way towards the edge here. But that's how Bob wants it. Yes, Morris. Morris, the vole you killed earlier on is now dead. It was nearly dead when I put it in the box, but it has since ceased to be. You little devil. Usually I get to, well, often I get to rescue them alive enough for them to survive, but not in this case. Morris 1, Vol 0. Okay, so this is interesting. There's a bunch of low ones here, which I think maybe also what's happening over there. I think 14 is low, which is making 15 high. So I'm going to go back to the top here and very carefully recalibrate. It's alright, as it happens. Go right to the edge. See, that's the interesting bit, because we might be looking at saying, okay, there's a high spot on 15 which is compromising that bend, but that's a relative term. The high spot on 15 could well be the product of a low spot on 14, if you get what I mean, and we are always governed by the low spot. The lowest point is what dictates the action on the guitar, or the settings, and I can see that there's something going on like that on this guitar. So I'm just going to kind of concentrate on, if we can, getting gently to that low spot on 14 so we don't get the effective high spot on 15, which is causing this choke on the bend. Okay, so we're concentrating. I think I might just be reaching it now. As I say, it's one of those funny things, you're dictated to by the low spots. We're nearly over it. So this time the choking is not killing the note, it's going above it. We can go above it. We can go through the note, so it's clearing it. Even that one is clearing it. So I'm going to do a little bit more in the B track, and I'm going to do a fraction more in the G track in case that's where it tracks over to. Like I say, I'm just sort of focus really on this 12, 13, 14. It's this one here. I'm going to really look carefully at that B track right down here, just either side of that point, and make sure we get it ironed out. And it can be such a tiny amount. Well, it's always a tiny amount when you're dealing with the actions as low as this. That's the reality of it. See? Now we're probably maybe just about heading into the G over there, so I'm going to do a little bit more on the G. So you can see there's a kind of priority order to this. There's can I free up the actual notes themselves? That's the first thing. Free up any blocked off notes, and that's usually the easier part of the whole thing. And then the harder one that gets quite nail biting at times is, okay, I've cleared the notes. Every note on this fingerboard is playing okay, but what's happening is I'm choking out and I'm doing bends. Like I said, at this low action, it only takes one fret to be slightly flattened or lowered for you to get a relative high spot next door to it, and that can be what's choking off your bend at a very low saddle action, and that's where the real challenge comes in. So I'm just going to give this a little bit more of a going over at the join between the G area and the B area, focusing it down on this end, and then I'm going to pretty much stop at this point, and that's as much as I'm going to do. And any more that has to happen, see that? Now that's not the most perfect bend through that note I've ever heard, but you watch that the tiniest quarter turn makes an imperceptible difference. That's now 1.3, something like that. Still God, these are hybrids, but they don't feel like nines to me. Well, that does actually. Okay, I'm out of tune, but I'm happy with where we've got with that. I'm not going to wear any more away. I would rather just make a slight adjustment there if we have to, but that's playing. But that's the sort of trade-off that you've got to do, especially when you're playing with as low an action as this. That's nice. We'll give that a clean as well. Everything else will shine up lovely. So having done as much levelling as I want to do, and the other thing, by the way, is choosing to stop at this point, is I know that when I come to sand out the frets and reprofile them and then polish them, I know that what's also going to happen is I'm going to take a tiny fraction of material off the top so that they'll get a tiny bit lower again as I do that process, which if I'm almost there in terms of the cleared bend, then it will just improve that just ever so slightly. But there we go. So that's that done. Now the next thing I'm going to do is I'm done with these sacrificial strings, so they can come off. I'm noticing that Bob's got them strung the way I do them, coincidentally, or maybe they're having learned that way from the channel that I show it many times, but it's a cute way. I learned it from a guy called Gavin Downey, who was on some guitar forum, I think, to do with guitars and keyboards in Brighton. He was just I think he was just a contributor on that forum. But anyway, so he was a guitar tech for a number of bands, and he showed how he did it, and also how he stretched out the strings afterwards, which was a very good lesson. So I've been doing it that way ever since. I hate having overhanging bits of wire because they're guaranteed to stick in you. So I am a stickler for trimmed end, go the right way, trimmed end discipline, so that we don't get spiked. We can do without that. There goes the nut again. Nobody wants. He's got me! Frag! Oh. Sorry. Parent advisory. Oh, I hate those bits of string. Right, this can come off, and I'm not going to keep these strings. I've got plenty of sacrificial strings. I'm not going to keep these particularly because they hurt me. Take that. Right, so at the moment, as it stands, everything is exactly as we want it. Now, what's possibly going to happen during the next bit of work is that things are going to move. So for example, these may move, the bridge may screw down a bit more. It doesn't matter because we can go at any time we want back to the playing action that we choose. So it really doesn't matter if this doesn't stay in order. Okay, so the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to mask off. No, I'm going to first of all mark off with marker pen, cover the frets again. And this is again to allow me to track what's happening, but in a different way. This time I'm going to take the flattened tops of the frets and with a concave fret crowning file, I'm going to round them off again by taking away the sharp shoulders of the frets. But I'm going to aim to leave a little thin line of marker pen down the top, and if I can do that, it tells me I've taken away the edges of the fret, but I've left the top untouched. And if I can leave the top unmolested on all of these, it means that the relative levelness that we've just achieved will be undisturbed and preserved. We don't want to file these down any further and reduce them in height, because then we recreate, or we introduce unevenness again, which would then cause choking and buzzing and everything we've been working to overcome. So that's a low fret, number 3. Again, if you remember what I said, that low frets are the kind of determinant in all of this game. They are what makes, the low fret makes the next fret high, relatively speaking. So you've got to remember when you're talking about evenness in frets, it's all relative. There's no absolutes. There's no absolutely high fret and no absolutely low fret. Which is why, as I say, a particular fret that may have been damaged, for example, quite often, or sometimes, you'll see somebody take a, I don't know, like a fret rubber or something, if they've had a chip on a fret, and they might kind of go at it with some sandpaper and then file it and polish it and so on. That's okay in one sense. You might have taken, somebody who's kind of not in the know will think they've fixed the damage to that fret. What they'll do then is you'll create a low spot on that fret, which when fretted will push the string into a cavity or trough, which will effectively make this fret relatively that much higher, because this one's that much lower. And so you've created a high spot by fixing a piece of damage on your fret. And if you really want a fret level to get your action as low as it can possibly be, that low fret and the resultant relative high one next door in line, it's that low one that's going to restrict what you can do. And sometimes you have to make a judgment call. Are you going to continue taking all the frets down to bottom out the lowest in the sequence, or is it so low that you'd be wise to pull it and replace it with another fret of a known gauge that you can bring down then. So let's say you're bringing down one fret to meet all the others as opposed to bringing down all the others to meet one low fret. That sort of makes sense, doesn't it? Yeah, you get what I mean. Anyway, that's again the judgment call. But it's quite easy for somebody who hasn't done it and hasn't thought it through like that to kind of go at it and make a hell of a mess, because You've got to think of it as a relative concept, it's not an absolute. Okay, so these are the frets with their flattened edges rounded off, and wherever possible what we've left untouched is the tops, or in reality they get hit just slightly, but we stop as soon as the file hits them. And then the next part of the series is that we get the leather masking tape, and then we mask off the entire fretboard, because the next stage in this will be to sand out these frets to restore them to a nice scratch-free condition. And actually, to go beyond that, so we use progressively finer and finer sandpapers, so that it removes the scratches and eventually goes into a sort of polishing mode, for which I'm using micro mesh papers, which go from 1500 grit through to 12,000, and by the time you're at 12,000 it's practically just shining the frets. And actually at a 12,000 polish you can get on and play them, they're nice and shiny and smooth. So that takes a while to obviously mask off the fretboard to protect the frets, and obviously as the frets come closer together, as you can see, there's going to come a point, like after this fret, where I'm going to need to cut some tape. And I have I've done it so many hundreds of times now. I have a system that works for me, and it's pretty dependable. So I get this board. I've obviously done it on the previous one. Chuck away these leftover bits, and it just so happens that through experience I know that 4 strips of this masking tape of this size will create as much material as I need to mask off the entire neck, including the little thin bits. But that's my way of doing it. You can actually buy custom made gauges of tape, which I think for me is an expense that isn't really necessary if you can just take 5 minutes to do this. It's a bit fiddly, but you know, I pay £1 a roll for this masking tape, and this does completely adequately the job I need it to do. It's just a bit fiddly to mess around with a big ruler and cutting board, and blades that are often starting to not be sharp anymore, and they sort of wander all over the place like that. So yeah, so the next thing I do is I cut 2 of these strips into thirds widthwise, and this is usually where I get into troubles, because either the ruler moves or I end up cutting aluminium, like I have there. You wouldn't believe it. It slices the aluminum. Anyway, no matter how I do it, it's quite difficult. Hey, why don't I go and buy some of that blue, specially thin stuff that you can get? Anyway, this does me just fine. So I'm just cutting 2 strips into thirds, and then the other 2 I cut into halves, and it seems to cover everything I need. And that's probably about 5p's worth of masking tape, if that. So cheap as chips. So it's the same. Eventually this board will get so raggedy that it will be lifting off chips of wood all the time, and it will be unusable for the purpose. But it's a nice simple way of doing it. And then you just carry on picking bits off. So I start with the thicker parts of the stuff, chuck it on, press it down, and so on and so on. And the first few need a double up right over the join, just to be on the safe side. So I grab a thinner bit from somewhere else and just tack it over the join and carry on. So this will protect the fingerboard. Okay, so it's very meditative and slow and boring, but very British, slow-paced thing, as somebody commented on the video. You're right. Well, British are always slow. Actually, they're not these days, but I like to be. It's such a nice thing not being in the London rat race in some ways. I enjoyed my time there a few years ago. Actually, I enjoyed more travelling to other places than London. Nothing against London particularly, but I enjoyed the sort of global travel more, because that came with a fair bit of time sitting at airports watching planes take off and travelling and stuff. I never got tired of doing that. Although actually in this day and age I'm kind of quite glad in a scaredy sort of way that I'm not doing so much of it. But I used to, my routine used to be every Thursday night I would find myself leaving the office. I'd stayed up in London for most of the week, and I'd leave the office on Thursday afternoon, evening, 5 o'clock, and I'd have a rucksack with all my week's stuff in it, including my bedding. When I stayed at a friend's place, took my own bedding with me, and then I'd usually have a guitar that I would source during the week on Gumtree or eBay, which I'd then gone and bought, picked up, and I would have the guitar and the rucksack, and I would walk a fairly fast pace from the office in Borough down to Elephant and Castle, where, because that was the beginning of the tube line, I was able to always get on an empty tube and get a seat, because I was absolutely exhausted by that time in the week. And then I would sit down with all my stuff on my knee and propped up as the tube train sort of started its long journey. It was all the way up to Paddington, where I'd get off from my mainline train, but it was so tired, and it used to get so crowded. In the summer it would be so hot that I would be falling asleep, and practically asleep by the time a few stops had gone by, and it was this, I remember this sort of red-eyed rocking backwards and forwards until it finally arrived at Paddington, at which point there would be this huge crush of people leaving the train to go through to the main line overground train station, which again would be absolutely packed, heavingly packed, and then there would be the process of finding where your train was it delayed, and so on and so on. And eventually, after another hour or two of waiting, and the train people had this thing of not permitting you, they wouldn't allow you through the gates to go and stand on the platform where your train came to every week, because it might be that it wouldn't go from that platform. But I kind of knew that if it didn't, then I'd still have time to sort of rush around to wherever it was, and of course passengers would all have their apps telling them, actually more accurate information than most of the train staff had. So we kind of knew where it was going. But anyway, they'd keep you away from the platform for hours until the last moment, which then resulted in kind of an insane rush hour sort of dash with all those exhausted city people running for these trains, fighting their way on to get a seat, and tempers flaring, and people not only getting on, pushing and shoving and running to get on and get a seat, but then people did that thing of getting on and then spreading out their baggage around them, so they do everything they possibly could do not to allow someone else to sit next to them, because they didn't want to be sociable or have some other human being in their space. And don't get me wrong, I often felt like that myself, but I would never go so far as to stop someone else getting on or sitting down. But yeah, it was a rat race in some ways, and then everybody would be eating their supermarket food until and sit on the train for 4.5 hours, or 4 hours usually, until it pulled in and into Plymouth, yeah, where I live. And then get home. Claire would come and get me, and I'd get home for about midnight. And then I'd have the weekend at home, and I'd do the same thing going back on the Monday night. So yeah, I don't miss that part, I tell you. Right, just a heads up then. So what I've got is I've got my micro mesh set. I've got I don't know which is which now. I'll just do it by eye. Okay, I've got my 3 grades of paper, all a bit crumpled up at the moment, coiled up. So I'm going to go from 600 to 1000, 1500, and then get to stay still, 1500, and then onto the micro mesh. And then it'll take about half an hour, so I'll stop the camera and do save you the misery. But I'll come back when this is all shined up and we're ready to restring. But yes, I'm glad I'm doing this and not traipsing through the city once a week, fighting my way onto a train for that long ride home. Anyway, right, I shall catch up with you at the end of this. Okay, long time later, and away we go. Finished the polishing and the sanding. Also rounded off the sharp edges of the frets a little bit before doing the polishing, because that way it allows me to sand where I've rounded them, if you get what I mean, because that is a file, and even though it makes it easier or less sharp than before, it's still not 100% smooth because it's a file. So anyway, the ultimate bit you want to do is then sand it off to smooth it out, which is what I did. Just going to wipe some of the dust off here that accumulates before we go any further. Okay, so next thing, off with the protective masking tape, and then a bit of a clean up. And after the bit of a clean up, we're going to oil the fingerboard and then get ready to restring. And the nice thing about doing it all this way is that that's the main part of the setup done. Everything will fall back into the configuration it was in while we were doing the fret leveling. As soon as we load the neck again with the string forces. So, like I say, that's a good thing about this method. The neck is obviously relaxed at the moment and gone back to its unloaded configuration. But that's only for a minute. So here we have 90 ball hybrid slinkies. I'm just going to do a quick bit of rub down with some of the last remaining naphtha, just to get as much as possible of the dust off the body, because it is a dirty process, there's no doubt about it. When you're doing this, you are definitely spreading dust around, and so it is good to give it a clean up afterwards. And then kind of a quick run down the frets. And then what we'll do is this removes some of the oil from the wood, or from the surface anyway, because it's a solvent. And we go back and replace it, but it's a nice quick clean up. And then I can also see there's dust on the headstock too, which we can take off while we're at it. Give the tuners a good clean down, and then down the back of the neck as well. So everything gets a bit of a going over to spruce it up. There we go. Put that out of the way. Okay. Strings. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to put, before I put the strings on, I'm going to put the truss rod cover back on, since I'm happy with where our adjustment is at the moment. I don't need to try and put it on later on. It just makes things a little bit more difficult. What I do need to do is just make sure this nut fits in here before I put that cover on. I'm going to replace this as is, i.e. without gluing it, mainly because that's how it came to me and it's not a problem, and it also I think it's more important on this guitar that Bob has the flexibility of moving it around, which is kind of important to him with his need for a wider thingy spread of strings. So straight on with the strings. Nothing's changed. What I'm going to do at this, forgot, it's the oil. Just get a bit of corner of this rag. Yeah, so I'm going to check the intonation afterwards once I've strung it. I haven't moved anything on the bridge in that respect, so it shouldn't have altered, but it may still need looking at anyway. It's a sort of standard thing you check through. And obviously this bit of oil now will get soaked up by the wood. Oh, there goes that nut again. Right. Stay. Right. So I'm just going to load up all the strings and then we'll attach them all and go into the stretching process. And I think, as I mentioned at the beginning, this is really a good one to spend time on whenever you're restringing your guitar, because after doing loads of setups, one of the things that strikes me about the guitar is that the most important thing of all the components, all the parts, or all the things a guitar does, as a musician or somebody, a bit of a poetic license, but as a musical person, I would say that of all the things a guitar needs to do, stay in tune, play in tune and stay in tune is at the top of the list. In purely a priority sense, if it can't do that, it doesn't matter how much it costs, how sexy it is, how cool the pickups are, how amazing the action on the neck is, or whatever. If it won't play and stay in tune while you're playing it, then you're wasting your time, and you know that you won't come back to it. You'll just leave it. You won't play it anymore. You'll give up on it. So as a result of that, I focused when I started doing this, I paid a lot of attention to the tuning and also some of the myths and misconceptions about tuning. And I don't mean the science of it and all that stuff that people can often like to get, whoops, that's not so good, that people can get caught up in, like people say that if you tune to 432 Hertz it's better than 440 for A, and there's a whole bunch of weird and wonderful stuff. But the point is, when I say tuning, what I mean is making sure that your guitar will stay in tune, and as you're playing it, it will remain in tune. It's a fundamental thing, and like I said, I've had loads of guitars that I just won't play because they don't stay in tune, or actually I can't even make them play in tune, it seems. So anyway, I paid a lot of attention to that, and what I've learned is that tuning stability has got almost nothing to do with the stability's got nothing to do with the tuners, and that's the first funny thing, because in a world where people especially people experts on forums and those who like to buy kit, they like to insist that if they give advice all the time, you know, if somebody says my Gibson won't stay in tune, they go, change those tuners, dude, you know, you've got to get the latest slingshots by such and such, or hip shots or whatever they are. Anyway, and the advice is often you've got to have the best brand and the best piece of kit, otherwise what do you expect? It's bound not to stay in tune. And that used to annoy me, and it still does, because it's not true. The tuning stability is down to actually three things, but the bulk of it is down to unreleased slack in your strings, which I was talking about at the beginning of this video, and which I found loads of in these strings. So when I first got this guitar, I was pulling it out of tune left, right and centre. So unreleased slack is the first enemy, and the second one is nut slots that even the slightest amount pinch the strings and cause them microscopically small pressure tension differentials either side of the nut. It's the simplest way of putting it. If it doesn't even out, if it doesn't balance or even out the tension either side of the nut, you'll tune it, it'll be holding greater tension on the, let's say, the bridge side, or I can't do it with either side, and what happens is you'll get it in tune, and then you'll bend a note, or if you've got a tremolo, you'll touch the tremolo or even hit a big chord, and then what happens is that little bit of force will pull the string into equilibrium, and the way it reaches equilibrium is by making the guitar go out of tune. So the vast majority of your tuning stability is down only to unreleased string slack, or slack in your strings, and even microscopically clagged or over tight nut slots. That's nothing to do with your tuners, the price thereof, the brand thereof, even the openness or closedness of them. Right? A set of quote-unquote toy tuners with open gears, and the simplest gears will hold tuning unless the gears have lost all their teeth, literally, and you can see them going backwards under load, right? But it isn't, it's almost never the case. You'd have to have literally stripped them to a round wheel before that happens. But so it's all down to the, well, 95% of it is down to, 98% of it is down to unreleased slack and incorrectly cut nut slots. If you get those two things sorted out, you will have a guitar that plays and stays in tune the vast majority of the time. Even a cheap Strat with a tremolo on will stay in tune when you use the tremolo. Particularly if you help it along occasionally on a Strat, if your break angle of your strings is too steep on the bridge end down there, it can act as a bit of a knife edge and catch the strings, which acts as if the nut was holding them, for example, and you can get a pressure differential or tension differential build up again at that point, which will have a similar problem. So you, for the absolute stability, you'd probably fit roller saddles, for example. But that's by and large, on an average on a guitar like this, the bulk of the vast majority of the tuning stability is down to releasing the stored up slack and getting your nut slots correct. And we've got the nut slots correct, and you'll know when they're not because you'll hear the strings pinging as you tune them. But at the moment we've got them sorted, and so having that sorted out, all we need to do now is the second part of that deal, which is stretch out the slack. First tip is get put as little material around the post as possible. This is about the smallest amount whilst getting a really good grip. People like locking tuners for that reason, that it stores almost no extra material. Now that does have a positive impact on tuning, only because it doesn't allow you any space to capture any unreleased slack and hold it there like a reservoir, which a overwound peg does. But the downside of using a locking tuner is that you won't, unless you're careful, you won't get more than one loading and unloading of that string out of it, because the locking mechanism crimps the string, and if you do what's kind of suggested, like you pull the string all the way through, lock it, and then just go one turn, what happens is you've basically crimped it at its first closest point of entry to the thing. If you then undo it and try and put it back on, you'll be trying to tighten it up on that same crimped spot, and it will break every time. So my advice is, if you do use locking tuners and you want to at least maybe be able to slack your strings off once, maybe to change something, and I don't know, whatever you might want to do, give yourself the option to do it by pushing it all the way through and then taking it back a finger's thickness, then lock it, then turn on a tiny bit more winds than you otherwise would have done, and that literally is only still half a wind, but that half a wind will allow you to bite on that point the next time. It's still weaken the string. There's no guarantee, but it will give you it'll give you about one re-go at it, whereas you won't get any goes at it if you do it if you just pull it right the way through and crimp it off. So in the process of pulling all the slack out, you saw what I did. I was using my thumb and forefinger to pull the slack out, and now I'm going to give each one of these strings a sort of hefty pull, and I hold them so that they don't kind of move around too much over the sharp bits, i.e. the nut. I don't know why it doesn't stop it breaking when it wants to. I've got replacement 9s, so if I over pull it and it breaks, so what? Okay, so then we tune once. This is sitting off its saddle, so that's not handy. Alright, thank you. There's our first tuning. So remember, you might say, okay, a lot of people say, okay, nicely in tune. Well, okay, they tune it and they play. What I recommend is you tune it and play, even if it stays in tune, you get it again and you take out all the slack by giving it another physical stretch, and you could do this 2, 3, even 4 times, and you'll still be releasing little bits of stored up slack. Somebody once made a comment on a YouTube video and got really critical, like I was some sort of idiot doing this, like, what kind of treatment was I giving these strings, dude? And the question is, if you think, like I said at the beginning, if you think these strings are going to, on their own, release that slack, you're just sadly mistaken. And what you'll do is you'll blame it on the guitar. And a lot of the guitars you've probably had and sold on because you couldn't hear that ping, that's an indication of tightness in that that D slot. Yeah, your chances are you're the kind of person who's bought guitars and sold them on, saying rubbish wasn't staying in tune, couldn't live with it. That is lightning low. Okay, so you can see we're in tune there, right, roughly, closely. Next thing, get some bends into it. My fingers are not very strong for bending. Nearly in tune. I'm going to keep an eye on that D. In short, you want to be bending these strings until they don't drop any more tuning. And once they stabilise like that, you're good to go. And you won't get any more trouble. And the great thing is that the pleasure of just being able to plug in and play with your friends at a jam or a rehearsal or whatever without constantly reaching for the electronic tuner or whatever. You know, it's just a buzz. Okay, close to it. Now, as I said before at the beginning, there's a big drop off in volume, and I'm just looking at the positioning of this neck pickup. It's very, very close to the pickups indeed, especially when you're fretting them up here and now with this nice low action. So unless you want a massive drop off in volume, which I don't think we do, we want to also bring this up to match. I mean, you might, you know, again, it's down to your style of playing. If you are somebody who flips to the neck pickup for a lead break, then yes, you probably do want a boost in volume. But you might be somebody who flips to the treble pickup to cut through the mix. So I could hammer this and play it now, and it would stay largely in tune. Because the next part of it, we might as well do it while we're here, because we're ready, we're kind of heading to the finish line. The next and final piece is, let's not use that, let's use the actual tuner. I'll get the strap back, and then we'll just intonate, or check the intonation. Now, I say that with some trepidation, and if you've watched any of my videos, you'll be under no illusion about how much I hate the Tune-o-matic bridge as a device for intonating guitars. But having said that, it is a bit naff. It's too short a travel, there's not enough intonation adjustment room in the thing, and so that makes it difficult. And on top of that, it's fiddly. The adjustment is completely in the wrong place. Sorry, I've got blocked ears, my cord still. Yeah, the adjusters are always in the wrong place. It's clumsy, not enough intonation adjustment room, and so on and so on. And yeah, it's just horrible in simple terms. And what I'll do is I'll do both. I'll hear it and tune at the same time. So I'm just manoeuvring around carefully. Nice little tuner, this Korg thing. It's a through tuner. Oh. About the same balance, and now the difference is mainly tonal, not volume. But again, you can adjust that depending on what you want it to do. I'm missing, I've got something that's eating plectrums, you know, it's terrible. No, I'm absolutely all out of plectrums, I'm so lost with, and it doesn't help that the ones I do have are clear plastic which sit on top of here and disappear. Oh well. Okay, so if I was going to adjust the intonation on this monstrous beastly thing called a Tunematic bridge, I would be wanting a little screwdriver that looks like a little flat one, or one that looks like, wherever it's gone, my other one, which I can't find. Would you credit it? Right, oh there it is. Right, okay, so I need a flat screwdriver. So the aim of the intonation thing here is that for every guitar, for every string on a guitar, the string has to be an exact length to work with the spacing of the frets on this neck. Obviously the necks are built to a generic scale length so that they all follow the same formula, but it's known that within a 25¼ is it? Oh, forgive me if I'm wrong, Les Paul scale length, it is known that, and same with every guitar, after that basic length, scale length, which tells you where to position the bridge, then each string has its own individual length, which is it's usually shown by this staggered pattern, 2 sets of 3, particularly when you've got 3 bare ones and 3 wound ones. So you can see basically each string having a common launch point of the nut has an individual playing length based around what's called a scale length. Thankfully we don't have to set this by measuring them physically, because that would be nigh on impossible, but we do it by using the tuning. And the secret of this happens to be that if at the midpoint of the string, which is the 12th fret, you ping the harmonic, and if you fret the note, it should be, if the string length is correct, it should be exactly the same note. Now you can see, according to my little tuner there, that's showing up as fractionally sharp. However, anyone with a bright any bright spark will notice, you don't need reverb, any bright spark will see that there's a variable in this, and it's this. Okay, I'll make it go really sharp. Look at that. That's obviously badly intonated, or I'll do it very lightly. That's spot on. Do you get the problem? Everybody, well, I'll tell you how compounding it is. Everybody, not only does everybody fret differently, i.e. you'll do differently from me, you'll press differently. So how can we have a standard reliable intonation that fits everybody? We clearly can't, right? So precise people who want to spend 5,000 quid on a tuning device, forget it. Okay, there's no point. That variable, right, between every individual human being is different. Not only that, you can multiply the instability of that, the variableness, by the fact that every time I do it, I'll do it slightly differently, and every time you do it, you'll do it slightly differently, depending on whether there's an R in the month or not. Now if it's miles off, you'll hear it, because it will, your average range of fretting will still show up that the scale length is substantially wrong. So this really has to be done to your playing style first and foremost. Forget spending loads of money on the tuning equipment. This 20 quid, 30 quid tuner is more than adequate. The important thing is to control the variable realistically. And the variable is your way of fretting the note. Now I can't tell you how you're going to play it, all I know is how I'm likely to play it. And you can see, the way I play it, it's slightly sharp. Now if I make this adjustment, I love how this guitar sounds. These Epiphones, I do like the sound of them. If I make this adjustment, fractional adjustment, I'm adjusting for me, and I could be heavy-handed. But slightly flat, see? Either on or slightly flat. So you can see you can't win. But it's the nature of the beast. Well, according to this, we're going 3 high and then 3 slightly low. I'll try it again. Notice I'm holding down the other strings. Slightly sharp. Okay, let's do a tiny adjustment, right? So it's on the side I like. Some people insist the screw should be pointing that way. Sorry, heads should be on this side. I prefer it on that side. There's a bit more room, especially if your pickups are high. There's no physical difference between them at all. So if I'm saying this is running sharp, it means the string is too short. And so I adjust. Now you see the first of the brilliant tunematic design flaws here. Oh look, the string is in the way. Oh look, I'm going to have to now slacken the string off, right? Take the pressure off this saddle, if I can. Move it out of the way. Get access to the thing. What did I say? It was short. That means I've got to lengthen it. That means I've got to turn it clockwise and yank it back. How much? I don't know. Let's drag the string. Let's stress it out a bit more. Drop it back in there. Run the risk of it snapping. Again, tune it back on the harmonic ping. Close. I like that. Now, having set that first one, I can see the physical relationship with the next ones. So I'm going to move the next ones out of the way. Annoying, hey? But what the heck? I'm going to move the next ones and move what sits down here without trying to avoid scratching as much as possible. I'm going to now screw that in a little bit physically. Can move that one too. And I'm going to put these into their little 3 stagger pattern, which I know is pretty much how they like to be. Now that one, the G, just hit the limits of its intonation. So if that isn't perfect, we got nowhere else to go with the G. Just wound those both on, they're all immediately going to be storing some coil that needs taking out. But let's do the G. Yeah. So that guess was good. And that one. Good, I like that. Now let's do the same for the D. Are showing as too long, which means I've got to push them forwards a little bit. So let's do the same trick. Aha, that D is still popping. That tells me it's holding a bit of stuff. So while I'm here, I'm going to, what did I say? They were too long. So I'm going to push counterclockwise, push this one towards the nut, and I'm going to follow this one. And I'm going to keep the sort of same gap between them in the stagger, and likewise this one, push it away quite a bit. So I'm following that sort of staggered pattern. Back a bit, right? Guessing, you see that? Guessing based on what I know. Now while I'm at it, I've got something I know is a slight problem, and I know that I've got a little bit of sticky gripping going on in that D slot. So now is the chance to take, what am I going to use? I'm going to use the edge of this, yeah, the edge of this blade, the back edge of this blade, folded, sorry my nose is a bit grotty, folded, and I'm going to move the D out of the way, and I'm going to go into this slot, and I'm just going to concentrate on not deepening the slot. I'm pressing against the sides more than anything else, and obviously you can see it's rewarding me by jumping up and out, but that's because I'm pressing the sides of the slot. So now when I tighten it up, I'm listening for that telltale twang. None. so now I'm only concentrating for a minute on these bottom 3 strings. Going to just give them a quick tug to stabilise them a bit. Now back to the intonation. Yep. A's pinged. Go back and pay that some sandpaper attention in a second. What you'll find is, you can prove this to yourself, if you find yourself with a string that pings in the slot, right, to test what I'm telling you about the fact it's holding tension, so you're messing around with a string, you're doing stuff, and then at some point on the way up, you hear a ping in the slot. Oh, it's pinging, right? So we go to our A. Now, because it's pinging in the slot, there we are, nicely on A. I know this string isn't stable in tuning, so watch. We're way flat now. Hear a ping. So you think you're in tune. You bend a string while playing. You're flat again. Okay, so that's because we've got, it's catching, and that's how important it is to get this bit right at the beginning. Don't try and solve this by shoving nut sauce or other kind of lubricants in there. I will use some graphite in a minute, some powder, but only when I've got this absolutely smooth beforehand without it. So we're almost there now. Still pinging. In we go. Now this time I'm going to switch to a different flat edge. Okay, give me a little bit more kind of force against the side wall and just widening the slot. That's all I'm doing. Concern is it might be pinging over. It's the other thing. You can get caught out. It's usually at the nut, but it can be over this deliciously sharp bridge point here. And you're going to have to, if you clear it out of the slot and it's still pinging, you're going to have to try and work out which end you think it is. I think it's still at the nut end, but it's not always the case. Sometimes you think you've got it sorted and what's really pinging is the string tree on the budget Strat, and that's also entirely possible. So I'm doing my best to widen that. Fraction with this, and also with this last B, if I can even move it with the strings on. Not the ideal thing, but tiny ping there. Off and put them back on, you kind of put a little bit of slack back on the peg, not tons, but a little bit. You have to sort of stretch it out again like this. But you can see it's a weakening. I would so like it if we didn't have to do that, Mr. Tune-O-Matic. Yeah. Oh yeah, okay, that's nice. Right, last stretch, that's it. Oh, mega. I'm going to do D and A again. Widening on the D and the A. I'll just leave that, plug it in while I do it. The D and the A. Problem with the design of the nut on this as well is it's so thick, so deep and so thick that what it does is it just makes it impossible for a string, or it really kind of mitigates against the string going smoothly all the way through, because as soon as it's got any depth to it, what otherwise could be a straight line for your string to go neatly through without any friction and resistance, in reality is actually slightly curved, and so it basically eats up any chance of the string going straight. Good, right, that's that done. Let's get rid of that. Now, last thing I'm going to do, and again, look at this, it's one more taking off of the strings, but hopefully it's the last one, or it is the last one. And I'll throw a blade at myself. Now what I'm going to do is put a little bit of graphite powder into the nut slot, into each nut slot. Doesn't matter how much really, you can spill it. This is the same as soft pencil lead for all intents and purposes. If you haven't got powder, I buy this in a hardware shop and it's the only jar I've ever bought. I use it all the time. So yeah, you'll never run out if you buy the actual container of it. And so what I'm doing now is I'm just basically put a little bit in every one, do the strings back in for the last time, and then we're good to go. But you can see how much time has gone into getting both the tuning, the slots, the nut slots and the intonation right, but they kind of all work in together, so that doing the intonation is a perfect opportunity to make sure the slots are perfect, and it'll quickly show up when they're not. sharp saddles on these Les Pauls, and that's what's likely to break this break a string faster than anything else on this. Plus, having stretched and taken them off and on several times, again, like I said, increased untold amounts of time by the fact that that tune-o-matic bridge is such a stupid design. But anyway. See how smoothly everything works. Okay, so you see how long that process takes. It's not quick at all. You know, we put the strings on, and it's probably been about an hour now. Maybe I'm exaggerating, but it's not quick from putting the new strings on to getting it into a stable playing condition. And that's pretty much about it. With a lightning, blistering low action. So there you go. Epiphone Les Paul standard model. In lovely gold top finish, great sounding pickups, everything about this guitar I like, and now with the fret level it's ironed out those choked non-bends, so they're really working up here, and then stabilising the tuning, get the intonation right, fair bit of adjustment in that, but got it right. But do remember that point I made, and that is that the intonation is a subjective, or it's not an objective thing. It depends on how everybody frets their notes. I mean, yes, there is technically, well, no, actually there isn't an absolute in respect to the string length. If you cannot do anything but fret the note in a certain way, then you need a slightly different length to string to somebody who frets a note in a different way. It's as simple as that. So there you can see there's no absolute in it, and if there's no absolute, and if there is such a large amount of variation in those variables, in that variable, how you fret it, then this kind of insistence on absolutes, where people really get off on lambasting others for using inferior equipment to set the intonation. If there's a huge variable in it, what's the point? You're talking crap. And the truth is, any musician can set the intonation with their ears, and it is down to how you fret the note. So I've done it to the best of my ability to how I fret it on a sort of an average-ish grip, and I can't tell you if that's the same as Bob's or anybody else's, but I've done it to what I think is as good as I can do it. But it is one of those things that you come down to, when you come down to it, there is only one way of being sure it's exact, and that isn't to waste your money on expensive brand tuners. It's to do it yourself on the guitar you play, in the way across a series of averages of the way you fret it, because it's down to your technique, nothing else. Okay, so hope that was useful. Hope there were a couple of things in there that provide you with years of good playing. I think the tuning advice is the one I feel most strongly about. So hope it was good for you. I'll see you again on another guitar very soon.